The day I graduated high school was supposed to be one of those moments you never forget for all the right reasons. The kind where your parents smile proudly, your name echoes through the auditorium, and you feel seen. But when my name was called, there was silence. I searched the crowd, scanning the rows until I found them. My mother, my father, my brother. They sat still. No applause, no smile. My heart stumbled in my chest as I tried to convince myself maybe they just didn't hear. After the ceremony, I walked toward them, clutching my diploma like a fragile piece of proof that I'd done something right. My mother's first words weren't congratulations. She looked me up and down and said, "You should have fixed your hair. It looks awful in pictures." My father chuckled, as if cruelty was some kind of family joke. My brother grinned, waiting for my reaction, like it was entertainment. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes and said maybe we could take a photo together. A real family picture, something to remember the day by. My mother froze. She turned to my father and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "I don't want her ruining another one. She looks wrong." My stomach twisted. My father laughed again, this low, mean sound that filled the air between us. My brother's laughter followed, sharper, crueler. I felt small, like I was shrinking right there in front of them. The camera in my hand trembled. My mother turned away, already pulling my brother close for a photo without me. I stood there, holding my diploma, pretending the world wasn't tilting under my feet. The photographer's flash went off, catching their smiles. I wasn't in the frame. I remember the smell of perfume and cologne and sweat, the sound of laughter that didn't include me. I remember walking away before the tears could fall. That night, the house was filled with muffled conversation and the clinking of dishes. I sat on my bed, staring at the diploma, tracing my name with my finger. Then I heard them through the wall, my mother's voice bitter and tired. "She's not like us," she said. "She's plain." Embarrassing, my father agreed. "We can't show her off. People will wonder what went wrong." I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop the sound that wanted to escape, the kind that was half laughter, half sob. Ugly. That word sank into me like ice. I didn't cry that night. I just sat there, still and numb, while something inside me broke in silence. And as the light from the hallway flickered across the floor, I thought, maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong in their picture. But deep down, another voice whispered, "Maybe one day, I'll make a life so beautiful they'll wish they hadn't looked away." A few weeks after graduation, my parents called me into the living room and said they wanted to take me out for dinner. My mother smiled in that rehearsed way she used when strangers were watching, and for a second, I believed her. I thought maybe this was her way of apologizing, of starting over. I told myself families fought and healed all the time. I even wore the one dress she said didn't suit me, hoping she'd notice I was trying. The restaurant was nice, too nice for a family that never spent money without a reason. Candlelight flickered across their faces, but the warmth didn't reach their eyes. My father ordered wine, my mother fixed her napkin, and my brother kept checking his phone. No one asked how I'd been. I waited for someone to say they were proud of me, that they loved me. Instead, my father cleared his throat and slid an envelope across the table. He told me they'd been thinking a lot about my future. His tone was calm, but I could hear the edge underneath it. My mother nodded and said, "We think it's time you learn to stand on your own." I opened the envelope. Inside wasn't money or a card, just a single sheet of paper that read, "You're no longer our responsibility." My hands shook. I laughed, thinking it had to be a joke, but my father just stared, stone still. "We can't keep carrying your failures," he said. "You're 18 now." It's time to face reality. My mother reached for her glass, eyes cold and certain. We've done enough, she added. My brother smirked, the same grin he wore when I lost something he wanted. I felt the walls closing in, the clinking of cutlery around us fading until all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. I folded the note back into the envelope and asked quietly, "That's it?" My father nodded. "That's it." The drive home was silent. My brother hummed along to a song on the radio while I stared out the window, memorizing the lights sliding past. When we got back, I went straight to my room. They laughed in the living room, their voices muffled by the door, as if nothing had happened. I packed my clothes into a small suitcase, just enough to carry what little was mine. When I reached the door, I looked back once. Their laughter drifted through the hallway, careless and cruel. I whispered to myself, "You'll never see me broken again." And when the door clicked shut behind me, I didn't know where I was going, only that I was finally free, even if freedom felt like falling. The bus dropped me off just before dawn, the kind of pale gray hour when the world feels half asleep. I didn't have a plan, just a duffel bag, a few dollars, and the echo of my father's words stuck in my head. I walked until I found a flickering neon sign that read, "Sunset Motel." The S was burned out, leaving only unset. I took it as a warning, or maybe a promise. The room smelled like old carpet and cigarettes. The mirror above the sink was cracked down the middle, splitting my reflection into two versions of myself, one that looked afraid and one that looked angry. I tried not to look at it, but it was impossible to ignore. Every time I caught my reflection, I heard her voice, my mother's, sharp and certain. "You ruin every picture." I scrubbed my face with cold water, but the words didn't wash off. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling stains, wondering how someone could feel so empty and still hurt so much at the same time. The next morning, I walked to the diner across the street, the one with the faded, "Help Wanted" sign in the window. The manager barely looked up when I asked for work. He pointed toward the kitchen and said, "You can start washing dishes." It wasn't much, but it was something. The steam burned my hands and the hours dragged on, but at least it was quiet. No laughter, no insults, no one calling me a disappointment. Sometimes, after closing, the waitresses would eat leftover pie and talk about their lives. I sat in the corner, pretending not to listen. One night, a woman named Gloria sat beside me. She was older, kind eyes, lipstick slightly smudged. She offered me a slice of cherry pie and said, "You've got that look, honey, the kind that comes from surviving something heavy." I tried to joke that I was just tired. She smiled gently and said, "You're not ugly, honey. You're just bruised." That line hit deeper than she knew. I went back to my room that night, replaying her words until they softened something in me. Maybe I wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe bruises could fade. I looked at the cracked mirror again, and for the first time, I didn't turn away. I didn't like what I saw, but I didn't hate it either. Somewhere beneath the hurt, something small and stubborn was still alive. Something that refused to die, no matter how many times they'd tried to kill it. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny spark would one day become my salvation, and their reminder of what they lost. Years have a strange way of slipping by when you're too busy trying to rebuild yourself from nothing. The diner became my classroom, and the streets outside it, my test. Every dollar I earned went into an envelope I hid beneath the thin motel mattress. Some nights, when the loneliness crept in, I'd pull it out and count the bills, whispering to myself that one day it would mean freedom. Eventually it did. I moved into a small apartment near a community college where I studied psychology. At first, it wasn't about helping anyone. It was about understanding them. My parents, the cruelty that lived in their laughter. I wanted to know why some people needed to hurt others just to feel alive. Each lecture felt like unlocking another piece of the puzzle, And with every answer, I felt a little less trapped by the past. I changed more than my address. I changed my name. Not legally at first, just enough to let it sit on my tongue, new and unburdened. I started walking straighter, looking people in the eye. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. It was strange how power crept in quietly, how simply refusing to shrink could rewrite who you were. I didn't have money for fancy clothes or makeup, but I had something better: awareness. I learned how to listen, how to observe, how to carry silence like a weapon instead of a wound. And over time, people started treating me differently. They called me confident, graceful, even beautiful. I smiled when they said it, but inside, I never fully believed them. The voice of my mother still whispered sometimes, faint but persistent. Yet, every time I caught my reflection in a window, she sounded a little further away. When graduation day came, it felt like a quiet miracle. My name, my new name, was called, and this time, the applause came from people who actually saw me. Friends, mentors, strangers who believed I belonged. I held my degree and thought about the last diploma I'd earned, the one that had brought me shame instead of joy. That night, I took a photo of myself holding the new degree. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if I should send it to them to show what they'd thrown away. But something inside me said no, not yet. The story wasn't finished. They hadn't earned the ending, and I wasn't done becoming the woman they never thought I could be. By the time I turned 26, the motel girl I once was felt like a ghost I'd outgrown. I had a small apartment, a steady job, and a name that finally belonged to me, Dr. L. Hartman. People said it with respect, sometimes even admiration. I had joined a therapy organization that helped young women heal from emotional abuse, girls who carried the same invisible bruises I once did. Listening to them was like hearing echoes of my own story, only now I was the one guiding them out of the dark. Writing became another form of healing. Late at night, after sessions, I poured everything I couldn't say aloud into words. One article I wrote, titled, "When Family Becomes the First Wound," felt especially personal. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival, about how love can turn cruel when it demands perfection instead of acceptance. When the piece went viral, I didn't feel proud right away. I felt exposed, as if the world could somehow see through the polished name and recognize the scar underneath. Then one afternoon, an email notification appeared on my screen. The sender's name froze me in place. It was from someone in my hometown. I opened it, half expecting something harsh or mocking. But it wasn't that. Attached was a screenshot from Facebook. My article had been shared by a familiar profile, my mother's. She had written, "Such a brilliant young doctor. More people need to read this." I stared at the post, reading it again and again, the irony sharp enough to make me laugh. She didn't recognize me. The photo attached to the article showed a woman with calm eyes, straight posture, and a quiet strength she'd never known in me. The daughter she'd disowned had become a stranger she admired. I didn't comment, didn't reach out, didn't correct her mistake. I just sat there, smiling in silence. For the first time, I understood what poetic revenge really felt like. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to hurt. It was calm, clean, and beautifully quiet. That night, I looked at the framed degree on my wall and whispered, "You see me now, don't you?" The universe didn't answer, but in the silence, I finally felt something close to peace. It arrived on a Tuesday, buried beneath bills and charity flyers, a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering. I almost tossed it aside until I saw the sender's name, my brother. My pulse stuttered. Inside was a wedding invitation, thick paper, embossed edges, every detail screaming perfection. His fiancée's name was printed in elegant cursive, and at the bottom, in smaller letters, were my parents' names, hosts of the celebration. For a long time, I just stared at them, my fingers trembling slightly. 11 years. 11 years since that dinner, that note, that night I left with nothing but a suitcase and a promise to never break again. I thought they'd erased me from their lives. Maybe they had. The invitation felt less like a gesture of inclusion and more like a test, as if the universe was asking, "Are you really free, or just pretending?" I almost tore it up. I almost convinced myself I didn't care. But then my eyes caught on one detail: the venue, the same banquet hall where they'd mocked me after graduation. The memory came rushing back, the laughter, the flash of a camera, my mother's voice saying I ruined every picture. It was like opening an old wound that had never fully healed. For hours, I sat at my kitchen table, the invitation open in front of me. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend I'd never seen it. But another part, the stronger one, knew I couldn't. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about ending a story that had haunted me for over a decade. My therapist once told me that closure isn't about getting answers. It's about taking your power back. I used to think that meant forgiveness. Now I realized it meant facing what you once ran from and walking through it without fear. That night, I opened my laptop and booked a flight home. I filled in the name field carefully. Dr. L. Hartman, a name they wouldn't recognize, a woman they couldn't belittle. When I clicked confirm, a quiet calm settled over me. I wasn't going to prove anything. I was going to end something. And for the first time in 11 years, I actually wanted to see their faces again. The night of the wedding felt colder than it should have. Maybe it was nerves, or maybe it was the ghosts that came with me. The banquet hall looked just like I remembered. Same chandelier light spilling gold over polished floors. Same smell of flowers trying too hard to hide the scent of money and pride. I stood at the entrance, a stranger in a black dress, and watched the laughter float through the air. No one looked twice. No one knew who I was. For a second, I thought about turning around, but then the hostess smiled and asked for my name. Dr. L. Hartman, I said. She checked her list and nodded. My parents' names shimmered across the guest program in gold ink, just below my brother's. I took a slow breath, squared my shoulders, and walked in. Conversations hushed for a heartbeat as I passed. I could feel eyes on me, curious, admiring, confused. It was strange, being noticed for all the right reasons when, once, I'd been invisible for all the wrong ones. I took a seat near the back, close enough to see everything, far enough not to be seen. My mother floated through the room like she was auditioning for perfection. When her eyes brushed past me, there was a flicker, just a hint of something. Familiarity, maybe. But it vanished before it could bloom into recognition. My father was louder than ever, boasting about his successful son. Each word landed like an echo of an old bruise. I listened quietly, hands clasped in my lap, letting his pride spill into the air while he pretended his daughter didn't exist. It was almost poetic, watching them celebrate the illusion of family while I sat just beyond their reach. Then came the photographer's announcement. "Family photo!" he called out. Chairs scraped, guests gathered, laughter rose. I stood for a moment, watching them form their perfect frame. My mother smoothing her dress, my father pulling my brother close. For a heartbeat, I saw the girl I used to be, standing at the edge, waiting to be invited in. But this time, I didn't move. I stepped back, quiet, unseen, choosing invisibility on my own terms. The camera flashed, freezing them in their moment. I smiled softly. They could have their picture. I had mine. the one life had painted through scars and survival. As their laughter filled the hall again, I turned away, the sound fading behind me. I didn't belong in their frame anymore. I was finally part of my own. The dinner began with champagne and false smiles. My brother looked happy, genuinely happy, and for a brief moment, I felt sorry for what my presence might shatter. His new wife, Emily, was radiant in lace and innocence, unaware of the rot sitting 2 seats away from her. My parents, of course, glowed with performance pride, their laughter sharp enough to cut through the hum of clinking silverware. I sat at the far end of the long table, an uninvited ghost in designer armor. The food looked expensive, the conversation shallow. I barely tasted anything. Every laugh from my father reminded me of the night they'd told me I was no longer their responsibility. I tried to stay invisible, to leave the past untouched. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Emily stood, glass in hand, her voice trembling with new wife excitement. "Mr. Hartman," she said sweetly, "what would you say is your proudest moment as a father?" The room leaned in. My father chuckled, patting his stomach like the question was too easy. "Well," he said, "one of my kids turned out perfect." He glanced at my brother, then smirked. "The other ran off." Laughter rippled through the tables, polite, hesitant, cruel. It was the same laugh I'd grown up drowning in. Something inside me went still, cold and certain. I rose slowly from my chair, the room's chatter dimming like someone had turned the volume down. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I didn't run off." Every head turned. "I'm Lily." The daughter you disowned silence fell heavy as snowfall. My mother's hand froze halfway to her glass, her face draining of color. My father's jaw clenched, eyes narrowing as if he could undo my words by force. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply told the truth. I told them about that dinner 11 years ago, the envelope that said I was no longer their burden, the nights I ate leftover pie crusts just to survive. I told them how I built a life they'd never imagine, a life that healed what they tried to destroy. When I finished, I set the microphone down. No one dared move. Somewhere in the back, someone started clapping, softly, uncertainly, but real. I turned toward the door, shoulders light, pulse calm. As I walked out of that hall, their silence followed me like an echo. For the first time, it didn't hurt. It sounded a lot like freedom. The morning after the wedding felt strangely quiet. No alarms, no noise, just sunlight slipping through hotel curtains, soft and golden, as if the world was trying to apologize for last night's storm. My phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was work. But then I saw the subject lines. "Your story changed me. Thank you for your courage. Are you really Dr. L. Hartman?" Somebody had connected the dots. Guests from the wedding had found my articles, shared them, and turned my speech into something bigger than I ever intended. Overnight, the daughter they'd tried to erase had become a story about survival. It felt surreal, like the universe had finally spoken on my behalf. Then the tone shifted. Messages from unknown numbers appeared. My parents. First came the anger. They accused me of ruining my brother's big day, of being dramatic, ungrateful, vindictive. I read every word in silence, feeling nothing but a quiet distance that used to seem impossible. Then came the desperation. They wanted to talk, to clear the air. But I knew better. They weren't seeking forgiveness. They were seeking control, the same way they always had. When my brother finally called, his voice was tight with frustration. "You embarrassed the family," he said. I almost laughed. "No," I told him, calm and clear. "That family embarrassed itself." For the first time, I didn't tremble. I didn't try to explain myself or soften my tone. I just spoke the truth and let the silence fall between us. It was heavier for him than for me. He didn't know it, but that silence was my freedom. The world outside my window looked new, lighter somehow. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching strangers walk by, ordinary people living unremarkable lives. For the first time, that normalcy looked beautiful. I realized then that revenge had never been my goal. What I wanted was peace. And peace I'd finally found. But peace has a funny way of leading you back to unfinished places. As I looked at the sunlight fading against the glass, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet knowing that the story wasn't done. Closure was calling, and it was waiting exactly where it all began. The road home looked smaller than I remembered. The trees leaned closer to the cracked pavement, and the street signs I used to walk past as a child were rusted and crooked. When I turned the corner and saw the old house, it didn't look like home anymore. The paint was peeling, the shutters hung unevenly, and the garden my mother once bragged about had withered into brittle weeds. It felt like time had been gnawing at the place, the same way guilt had gnawed at them. I parked across the street and sat there for a while, watching the curtains move in the front window. My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from the weight of everything I'd carried here. Then I stepped out and walked up the path that used to lead to my childhood. The porch creaked under my shoes. When I knocked, it wasn't loud, just enough to be heard. The door opened slowly. My mother stood there, smaller than I remembered. Her hair was gray now, her face drawn and tired. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. Then her eyes widened and filled with tears. "Lily," she whispered, reaching out. I didn't move. I just stood there, feeling the distance that no apology could cross. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. "I didn't come for that," I said softly. "I came to forgive you." Her lips trembled. "Forgive me?" "Yes," I said, "but not for your sake. For mine." My father appeared in the hallway behind her, his expression flat, proud, and stubborn. The same man who once told me I was a burden now looked like he was carrying every cruel word he'd ever spoken. He didn't say a thing. He just stared, as if silence could erase the years. I reached into my bag and pulled out an old photograph, me at my high school graduation, holding that diploma they'd laughed at. I walked past them and placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. "This is the last time you'll see me," I said quietly, "and this time, I don't need your approval." My mother sobbed, calling my name as I stepped outside, but the door shut behind me like a final breath. The house stayed still, empty, echoing, and for the first time, so did my heart, in the best possible way. The studio lights were warm on my face, softer than I expected. A small audience sat in silence just beyond the cameras, waiting for me to speak. The interviewer smiled politely, but I could see in her eyes that she already knew the story, the daughter disowned by her parents who turned her pain into purpose. It was strange hearing my life summarized like that, like a headline, but I wasn't here to relive it. I was here to redefine it. When the red light on the camera blinked on, everything else disappeared. The world outside that lens no longer mattered. Not the house I'd left behind, not the words they'd thrown like knives, not even the ache that had lived under my ribs for years. It was just me and the truth. We talked about family expectations, about the quiet cruelty that hides behind smiles and family portraits. The interviewer asked how I found the strength to forgive. I took a breath, steady and sure. "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't pretending it didn't hurt. It's deciding you deserve to stop bleeding from the same wound." She went silent. The crew did too. And then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "If you could tell that young girl, the one they called ugly, anything right now, what would you say?" I looked straight into the camera, feeling the red light burn steady. "I'd tell her that beauty isn't in how they see you," I said quietly. "It's in how you survive what they did." The room stayed still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. A week later, that clip went viral. Millions of views, thousands of messages. Strangers from around the world wrote to say they'd lived versions of my story. People who had been shamed, silenced, and made to feel small began sharing their own scars and their recoveries. I realized something I'd never understood before. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd been told they weren't enough. As my name spread, my parents faded. They became a background noise in a song they no longer controlled. And for once, I didn't need their silence or their apology. I just needed the peace that comes when you finally step into your own light, because that was the beauty they never saw, and the one I no longer needed them to. The morning light fell gently across my apartment, catching the edge of a frame on my desk. The same worn diploma I once clutched like proof that I mattered. 11 years to the day since my graduation, I decided to take it out of its box. My hands didn't shake this time. The paper still smelled faintly of dust and old ink, but the weight of it felt different now. Lighter, like it finally belonged to someone who understood what it had always meant. I carried it to the mirror, the same kind I once feared, the same kind that used to whisper my mother's cruel words back at me. For a long moment, I just looked. The face staring back wasn't flawless. It had faint lines near the eyes, the kind you earn from laughing too hard or crying until you finally stop. My hair had streaks of silver, and my gaze was steadier than ever. I didn't see the girl they'd mocked or the daughter they'd thrown away. I saw a woman who had built herself from ashes and silence. I thought about that night in the motel when the mirror felt like an enemy. I could still hear my mother's voice in my head, sharp and cold. "You ruin every picture." I smiled softly at the memory, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because if I hadn't known that pain, I might never have learned what real beauty was. I whispered, "You made it." The words came out small, but certain. I set the diploma on the table beside my framed doctorate, 2 pieces of paper that told a story no one else could write. One was the proof I once needed from them. The other was the proof I gave myself. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. I leaned closer to the mirror and touched the glass, tracing the reflection of my smile. The mirror no longer judged me. It witnessed me. It held my journey in its silent surface, the nights of hunger, the years of work, the moment I stood in front of them and didn't flinch. For the first time in my life, I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. The echo of their laughter had long since faded, replaced by something stronger, my own voice, calm and sure, saying, "You were never the ugly one." And as I walked away, the reflection stayed, smiling, unafraid, finally home. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you'd never be, and finding peace where they left only pain.